A lone caretaker finished his shift and locked the property gate from the inside. Nothing seemed out of place. His truck was still parked where he'd left it, the engine cold, the keys hanging from the ignition. But the man never clocked out and no one ever saw him leave. Investigators found no footprints in the gravel, no signs of a struggle, and no forced entry. The case was quietly treated as a simple disappearance. Until years later, when new evidence surfaced that turned what looked like an ordinary missing persons case into something far more unsettling. Subscribe to the channel if you liked the video and click on the bell icon for more true crime stories. At first glance, it resembled a walkaway. A man worn down by isolation, by long days among graves, by a job spent tending to loss. That assumption settled quickly and comfortably. A lone caretaker disappearing into the woods felt tragic, but explainable. Months later, a sealed mausoleum showed marks that hadn't been there before. 7 years later, someone finally forced it open. The cemetery sat far beyond the edge of town, surrounded by timberland where fog gathered low and refused to lift. Locals described it as peaceful, though the silence pressed heavy, swallowing sound after dusk. One full-time caretaker oversaw the grounds. He lived alone in a small trailer near the back fence, miles from neighbors. His routine never varied. He trimmed grass, repaired damaged headstones, and stayed late when burials ran long. Families trusted him. Supervisors relied on him. On a Tuesday morning in early fall, his radio went unanswered. By midday, the office called his phone. The call rang out. Near sunset, a supervisor drove out to check on him. The truck sat in its usual spot, parked neatly. Unhurried. The trailer door was locked. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed. A mug of coffee cooled on the counter. His wallet lay in plain view. No message explained his absence. Search teams fanned out through the surrounding woods as daylight faded. Deputies scanned the narrow creek behind the older plots. Volunteers whispered the same conclusion without being prompted. Exposure. A medical episode. A fall followed by confusion. Someone alone who wandered too far and never found his way back. The landscape supported that theory. Uneven ground. Dense undergrowth. A history of missing hunters. If he had collapsed, animals could have scattered evidence. If panic set in, familiar paths could have vanished in the fog. That explanation guided the search. By the second day, doubts crept in. Ground cover remained undisturbed. No torn fabric snagged branches. No blood marked the paths he walked daily. Tracking dogs lost his scent near the shed behind his trailer, as though he had vanished into thin air. One structure kept drawing glances. The mausoleum stood apart from the rest of the cemetery, built decades earlier for a prominent local family. Thick stone walls. Heavy metal doors. No windows. Visitors tended to pass it without slowing, unsettled without knowing why. During the initial sweep, deputies noted nothing alarming. The doors were shut. The padlock appeared old. Everything seemed in order. A volunteer mentioned something small. Gravel near the base had shifted. Not enough to suggest forced entry. Just enough to stand out against weeks of undisturbed ground. The note went into a report and the search moved on. Weeks passed. Then months. Search efforts scaled back. Flyers curled on bulletin boards. News coverage faded. The disappearance slid quietly into a different category. Probable accident. Unrecovered remains. The cemetery hired a replacement caretaker. Schedules resumed. Mowers ran. Funerals continued. Still, unease lingered. The new caretaker complained about nighttime sounds. Metal scraping. A hollow echo that carried when the wind shifted. He blamed animals. Teenagers. His own nerves. After dark, he avoided the mausoleum without consciously deciding to. Then maintenance reported something strange. The lock on the mausoleum doors had changed. It hadn't been broken. It had been replaced. Records showed no request. No authorization. No contact from the family. The mausoleum wasn't scheduled to be opened for years. The new lock looked clean, modern, and sharply out of place against weathered stone. Deputies returned. They tested the doors. Solid. Flashlights pushed through narrow seams revealed dust and darkness. Nothing more. The report was filed. The doors stayed shut. Time moved on. Storms cracked headstones. Trees fell. Seasons erased paths. The mausoleum endured, sealed and silent, until a historic preservation grant funded repairs across the cemetery. The family structure topped the list. On the morning workers cut through the lock, the foreman paused. He later said the air felt heavy, stagnant, as if something inside had been waiting. The doors finally opened. What lay beyond forced investigators to exhume a case the town believed had been buried forever. The smell came first. Stale, metallic, trapped for years with nowhere to go. Workers stepped back instinctively as the mausoleum doors opened wider, light spilling across a floor that hadn't seen daylight in decades. Dust drifted in slow spirals, disturbed for the first time since the structure was sealed. Inside, the temperature dropped. The mausoleum wasn't large. A single central aisle. Burial shelves stacked along stone walls. Everything appeared orderly at a distance. That sense of relief lasted only seconds. A preservation worker noticed the floor. Scuff marks cut through the dust. Not old ones. Clear impressions where something heavy had been dragged. The marks led toward the far wall, stopping at a stone slab that didn't match the rest of the interior. Its color was slightly off. The mortar looked newer. Authorities were called before anyone touched it. Investigators arrived within the hour. They sealed off the area and began documenting the interior inch by inch. The slab wasn't listed on original blueprints. Records showed no renovations, no repairs, and no reason for fresh masonry inside a structure that hadn't been opened in years. When the slab was removed, the case changed instantly. Behind it sat a narrow cavity, carved out of the stone. Inside lay a body wrapped in heavy plastic, bound tightly with cord that had cut into bone over time. The remains were partially decomposed, preserved only by the cold, sealed air of the mausoleum. Dental records confirmed the identity before the autopsy even began. The caretaker. The man everyone believed had wandered into the woods had never left the cemetery. The discovery raised immediate questions. Cause of death. Time of death. How a full-grown adult could be killed, concealed, and hidden in a public cemetery without detection. Investigators initially assumed the murder occurred the night he vanished. That theory didn't survive the autopsy. The caretaker had been alive for days after his disappearance. Bruising along the wrists and ankles suggested restraint. Dehydration markers showed prolonged confinement. The final cause of death pointed to suffocation, slow and deliberate. Someone had taken time. Someone had planned. The mausoleum wasn't simply a hiding place. It had been used. Attention turned inward. Every employee, contractor, and volunteer who had access to the grounds during that period came under scrutiny. Records were pulled. Schedules reviewed. Gate logs analyzed. One detail stood out quickly. The mausoleum lock had been changed less than a week after the caretaker vanished. Maintenance logs showed no entry for the replacement, yet invoices revealed a lock purchase charged to a cemetery account. The signature approving the expense belonged to a supervisor who denied authorizing it. That supervisor had since retired and moved out of state. Investigators dug deeper. Security cameras covered the front entrance of the cemetery, but the mausoleum sat well beyond their range. The caretaker's trailer had no cameras. Cell phone data showed his phone went silent shortly after his shift ended, with the last ping coming from within cemetery grounds. Witness interviews shifted the timeline. A grounds volunteer recalled seeing lights on inside the mausoleum late one night, days after the disappearance. At the time, he assumed maintenance work. Another employee remembered hearing shouting carried by the wind, dismissed as teens trespassing near the woods. Those memories resurfaced with new weight. Attention narrowed onto a small circle of people with unrestricted access and familiarity with the cemetery layout. One name appeared repeatedly in records, logs, and witness statements. A long-term contractor responsible for structural maintenance. Trusted. Experienced. Quiet. Present on site during the week of the disappearance. He had helped install the original lock years earlier. He had access to tools capable of cutting stone. He had left the state shortly after the caretaker vanished. Investigators tracked him down in a rural county hundreds of miles away. He agreed to an interview. Calm. Cooperative. Almost relieved to talk. He denied involvement and provided an alibi that initially checked out. Employment records placed him on another job site during the days following the disappearance. Something didn't align. Tool marks on the stone slab inside the mausoleum matched equipment he owned. A forensic review of purchase receipts showed specialty masonry tools bought weeks before the caretaker vanished. No work orders justified the expense. Then came the recording. 7 years earlier, a malfunctioning security camera at the cemetery office had captured audio without video for several hours one night. The file was archived and forgotten. After the discovery, technicians restored the corrupted audio. Beneath static and wind, a voice could be heard. It was begging. And another voice answered. Audio analysts cleaned the file frame by frame. Static fell away in layers. Wind noise softened. The voices sharpened just enough to understand intent without mercy. The pleading voice belonged to the caretaker. Weak, strained, interrupted by coughing. The second voice remained calm, controlled, almost instructional. Investigators recognized it within minutes. The contractor. Confronted with the audio, he stopped denying involvement. His explanation came slowly, fragmented, reshaped as evidence closed in. He claimed the caretaker discovered something he shouldn't have. Theft. Unauthorized use of cemetery property. Cash payments taken for off-record burials inside older mausoleums. He said panic took over. A confrontation escalated. Control was lost. Facts told a different story. The caretaker had been restrained inside the mausoleum shortly after his shift ended. Evidence showed he was kept alive for several days. Water had been given sparingly. Food had not. The contractor returned multiple times, timing visits to avoid staff schedules. He used his knowledge of the grounds to stay unseen. The lock replacement wasn't a cover-up after the fact. It was part of the plan. Investigators concluded the mausoleum wasn't chosen randomly. Blueprints showed a hidden cavity originally designed to store excess stone during construction. It had been sealed and forgotten. Only someone familiar with the structure would have known it existed. The contractor had worked on that mausoleum decades earlier. During questioning, he admitted sealing the caretaker behind the false wall. He claimed he intended to release him once things calmed down. Phone records contradicted that claim. Internet searches conducted during the confinement painted a colder picture. Queries about decomposition. About how long sound travels through stone. About how to prevent odor detection in enclosed spaces. 7 years passed because the crime blended into silence. The caretaker was officially declared dead after 18 months. His family held a memorial without remains. The cemetery continued operating. The mausoleum remained untouched. Every unanswered question settled into routine. Until the doors opened. The contractor pled guilty to murder and unlawful imprisonment. Sentencing brought little relief. The judge noted the calculated nature of the crime, the prolonged suffering, and the deliberate concealment. Life without parole followed. During the final inspection of the mausoleum, investigators discovered one more detail. Scratched into the interior stone, barely visible beneath years of dust, were shallow markings. Not random. Letters. A message carved slowly, likely with a fragment of broken stone. A name. A date. And a final line that ended mid-word. Proof the caretaker had survived long enough to believe someone might find him. The cemetery closed for months after the trial. Locals avoided the grounds even after reopening. Visitors reported an oppressive stillness near the mausoleum. Some claimed the air felt colder there. Others said sound disappeared too quickly as if absorbed by the stone. Those details never entered official reports. The mausoleum doors remain sealed now, reinforced with steel. No one is buried there anymore. And plaques explain what happened inside. The caretaker's name appears on a small marker near the back fence, close to the trailer where he once lived. Visitors leave coins. Sometimes keys. The case file ends with a single note from the lead investigator. The victim never vanished. He was hidden.